Just a couple highlights. On page 2 in the table there, you can see that our current operating fund surplus is at $4.29 million, which is up from last year at the same time of $1.4 million roughly. And the $2.9 million increase, it's a combination of increased revenues of $1.4 million, lower overall expenses of about $500,000, reduced or lower capital lease cost of $0.4 million, and lower capital purchases of about $500,000. And we'll go through the next section. We'll provide some detail as far as what those changes were. So under the revenue section, $1.4 million increase year over year. A large part of that has to do with the Ministry of Education grant that we received. The ministry increased their per pupil funding by $122, and that allowed us to get about an extra $3 million in funding year over year. The increase was offset by a decrease of about $2 million in the pay equity grant. So that pay equity grant, the dollars are the same year over year. It's just the timing of when the ministry is releasing those funds to the districts. So we're in the 2017-18 school year, the district has received about 40% of the grant as of December 31st. For this school year, we received 13%. So they've back-ended the load as far as how the funding comes to the districts. The other significant change has to do with our international student program, and there's increased revenue there due to tuition going up by $500 per student. And along with the higher student enrollment, that the district received about $600,000 more in revenue at the end of December 2018. And the third factor for revenue has to do with our interest income. And as the Bank of Canada raises their interest rates, funds that the district has with the ministry in the central deposit program, the interest rate increases there as well. So we budgeted an average interest rate of just over 2%, 2.08%, and the actual interest rate currently is at 2.75%. That brought in some additional funds for the district. Moving on to expenses, so I'm just on page 3. Again, salaries are the biggest expense category for all school districts. Close to 90%, or over 90% of our expense is our salary costs. One thing that I do want to talk about is the second paragraph there under salaries is our vacation accrual and how that impacts salary costs. So really, the vacation accrual is a bank that the district sets up on each pay period. So vacation is earned by staff each pay period. When staff take the vacation, that bank gets reduced. So in the months where there's minimal vacation time, the bank increases, and when there's more vacation taken, such as December or March during the Christmas and spring breaks, that vacation bank gets reduced. So that has a factor, as you'll see down below, when we talk about the salaries in the different categories there, as far as when we tie it back to how much of the budget should be spent by the end of December. So for the education assistance, 39.4% of the budget has been spent, which is consistent with last year. We expect about 40% to be spent by the end of December, which is roughly on target with where we are. We did see an increase in the budget year over year, and that's reflected based on the 55 new positions that came on board. And then some of the savings that we experienced is because the staffing wasn't in place right from day one of the start of the school. So the staffing came on throughout the month of September. So we realize in that, you see in the table there, about $102,000 in savings for the first 6 months of the year. Under other professionals, this is where you'll see the vacation accrual play a factor in the total spend of the budget. We're 6 months into the year. We expect 50% of the budget to be spent because this category is our 12-month staff. And you can see by the table there, our year-to-date December actuals are $4.375 million. And if we add back the vacation accrual for employees of $238,000, our total salary cost is about $4.6 million, which is 49.5% of the actual budget spent, which is right around the 50% mark. For principals and vice principals, again, same thing. It's the vacation accrual that plays a factor. Without adding back that vacation accrual and their actual spend of $10.9 million, they're at 46% of the budget. By adding back the $964,000 in vacation, they're at just over 50% of their actual spend for the budget. So they're right on track as far as where they should be. For the substitute costs, again, this one's a hard category to really budget for because it's really replacement staffing that's needed when we get a permanent staff that goes off on a leave. So the actual spend for this first 6 months of the year, it's less than where we were at December of 2017. But we're expecting that the expense will increase throughout the remainder of the year. So we have left that in there in the amended budget as well. For the support staff, this group of staff have a mix of 10-month and 12-month employees that are in this category. So the fact that we expect them to spend about $25.6 million as of December 2018, which is roughly 46.8% of their budget. And adding back the vacation accrual in there gets them to about 45.3% of their budget, so not too far off from where we expect them to be. Now, the difference year over year in the spending, it's largely due to an accounting entry for the annual facility grant. We have staff that work on the projects throughout the year, and the funding for the facility grant comes in the following year. So once we get that funding, we credit back the salary expense for this group, and the accounting entry for this year was about $375,000 higher than it was last year at this time, which reduces that expense a little bit. And also the vacation bank accrual is higher this year than it was last year. For the teacher category, they're right on track at 40% of our budget. Did realize fewer teacher vacancies at the start of the school year compared to last year. So that was the employee services teams worked hard to make sure that those vacancies are at a minimal. And on the benefits side, when we budget for benefits, we look at our annual cost, and it's based off of a percentage of salaries. And we budget when we did our calculations for this year's budget, it was about 26.5% of wage cost is our benefit cost. And since some of those benefits are wage sensitive benefits, such as CPP and EI, as they get, throughout the year, that's when you start, paying for more of those benefits, right? And because CPP and EI are on a calendar year, not a fiscal year that we're on. So at the end of a calendar year, your benefit costs will go down. Once we get back into the start, once we hit January again and everything gets reset, and you get more, all those employees who had already maxed out on their CPP and EI benefits, they're now starting to contribute again. So you'll see that start coming back up again for the end of the year. We also have a lower dollar amount in benefits for the teacher pension plan costs, and the actual bigger impact in the teacher pension, or the changes to the teacher pension plan premiums, hasn't actually hit this financial statement yet, because that takes effect January 1st, 2019. And then we do have the reduction in the MSP premiums. And again, the employer health tax hasn't hit us yet, because that takes effect January 1st, 2019 as well. So we'll see that coming into play in the amended budget. Under services and supplies, we mentioned this at the end of the first quarter report, where the significant factors or significant categories for service and supplies has to do with the 13.3 million budget under services, 11.2 million under supplies, and then 8.5 million under utilities. So under the services budget of 13.5, 6.1 million of that budget has to do with software licenses and IT libraries that are required to run the infrastructure for the district. The year-over-year change in this category is roughly $200,000. So we spent 1.8 million in the December 2018 and 1.6 million by December 2017. And the increase there is roughly to do with some work we did for archiving our HR data. We're going from an outdated software to our current software, and that's about $100,000. And another roughly $40,000 or $50,000 was for a system modification for the software for the finance department for some budget checking processes that helps us there. The consultant fees for under services also, there's an increase there. We do pay our international education agents a commission fee for the work that they do for us to bring students to our district. And there was some consulting work done on the board policy handbook, and as well as capital asset planning for 6 months of the year. I guess utilities is the biggest one that is going to play a factor moving forward. Since the Enbridge pipeline explosion that happened back in October, we've seen some pretty big fluctuations in natural gas costs. The milder temperatures that we've experienced throughout October, since the start of the school, has helped keep those costs under control. The colder weathers that we've experienced in January and February, we've definitely seen an increase in those prices. And as you'll see later on in the amended budget, we are budgeting for an additional $700,000 in natural gas costs based on the projections that we have. And then capital lease costs, we did have some leases which expired and new leases came on at a lower rate. We're expecting that we are going to start seeing a few more leases renew, and we'll see how that budget gets spent depending on what the interest rates and pricing comes back at. And the capital from operating, we did reclass some software purchases that were coded to other accounts last year, and they got recoded later after December 2017. So the year-over-year comparison isn't completely accurate, but we should start seeing that move closer to budget. That is the report.
Thank you, Suzanne, for that very thorough financial update. Does anyone have any questions, comments on the financial update? Yes, Trustee Gonzalez.
Through the chair, just a question on that pay equity grant and the timing with that. What caused that change? That was sort of unexpected thing.
Through the chair, it was the ministry just changed the timing of their payments to the district.
So now we're on a set schedule. Sort of moving forward,
The chair, yes, there was a set schedule last year as well. They just changed the time. They front loaded it, I guess, last year, and they're back loading it this year. Ongoing, yeah. The dollar amount stays the same. It's just when the district receives that payment.
Any other comments, questions? Yes, Trustee Reddy.
Through the chair, thanks, Shazad. I was just wondering also, is the $6 million IT cost reoccurring, or this is like a one-time?
That's sorry, through the chair, the $6 million is the budget for IT costs. So that it would be ongoing because it's for infrastructure that we need to run the district. It's technology.
Yes, Trustee Fraser.
When talking about the leases, it says there's been several leases expire. Is that spaces that we are renting as a district that are expiring? I'm just curious about what we would need to lease space, under what circumstances we would be leasing space.
Through the chair, most of those expired leases would have to be technology leases.
Right, not space.
Not space leases.
Yes, Trustee Fraser.
Okay, there was a comment around the substitutes, the costs for the substitutes and the percentage that's happened to the December date. And the anticipation was that would increase during the year whereas, the percentage for 2018 was lower than the percentage for 2017, but the expectation is that it would increase. Maybe you could explain that a little bit more.
Through the chair, again, it would just come down to timing. So, first half of the year, there may not be as much need for substitutes. The teachers would still be showing up. We didn't see as much sick time or lead time. And as the year goes on, we would expect that it possibly may increase.
Chair, I could add to that, Trustee Fraser, that it seems to be a trend in the district. Last year, the amount of substitutes to the end of December was 4.6 million, but by the end of the year, it was 8.6 million. So there is an increase that's expected in the second half of the year. We would have to do some investigation as to why that is. But the trend does cause it to increase.
Maybe I just comment on that. I think as a district we do a lot of support for our employees, but we could understand why there's a greater need, and that could feed back into being able to support the employees in a more effective way.
Just maybe we can follow up and see why that is the case.
I think the Associate Superintendent Batista might have a thought.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Through the chair, oftentimes our workshops and other things are happening in the spring. Release time, we have EDI, so we have probably about 200 kindergarten teachers that are being released up to 2 days. So our costs will increase for replacement. That could be one of them.
Any other comments? Yes, Allison.
I'm just wondering if part of the reason why it would be higher later on is also because until November, there's no access to Remedy. And Remedy is provided by TOCs. I'm not sure if that's.
The Associate Superintendent, he's still.
Through the chair, that would be a different line item under SEP, so that's under Classroom Enhancement Fund, so that wouldn't be charged to the replacement budget that way.
Yes, Thomas.
For the substitute, is it is it for teacher or is it for support staff also?
Through the chair, that'd be both.
Can we have can we see a breakdown of what the cost would be, in ratio of the total cost? I mean, it's very subjective when you say that our substitute cost is such amount, but we don't know what the breakdown is for teacher or support staff.
Yeah, through the chair, we can get something.
Thank you.
Yes, Archie.
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. Under the benefit on page 5, there's a mention of 1 million savings from MSP premium because they went 50% or they were eliminated. I think they were 50%, I believe, still. And it says offset by increase in other benefit premiums and WCB premiums. Can we get what other benefit premiums that went up to offset that cost?
Through the chair, things like our dental premium or group health, so all our extended health premiums, so it would be a combination. We could, we don't have a breakdown here with us, but we could sort of put something together.
Yes, thank you. So those are the extended health benefits costs. So let's say if we did not have these savings, so then our basically maybe our projected surplus would have been lower because those will be additional costs on our budget if we didn't have the savings of 1 million from MSP and we don't have control on the other premiums because they were going to go up regardless. So that means our surplus would have been lower than projected that if we didn't have that.
Through the chair, yes. Yeah, the 1 million savings definitely helps us offset those other increases.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions in this line item? Okay, with that, then we'll move on to item number 3, discussion items, funding model review. And I'll ask Trustee Valentine to speak to this.
Thank you, Chair. My report tonight is garnered from the notes from the Provincial Council and from conversations with the Metro Board that I met with today, and it involves 3 parts. One is the first part is sort of the variances of enrollment around the district. Not all districts are the same as. I wasn't going to use the power. I was just going to make an oral report, but if there's something, maybe at the end we can do some problem solving and comments. This is all around the funding model review, and it was interesting to note that around the province, the changes in school age funded FTE is different than Vancouver. We have 15 districts that are actually in enrollment decline across the province. So this is what the ministry is looking at and putting things into perspective when they're developing this model. And so there are 28 districts that are in a growth pattern from 0 to 2%. There are 11 districts that are in a 2 to 4% growth. And then there are 5 districts that are 4% plus in their enrollment increase. So we're all concerned about whether the funding formula is going to be fair for all districts. And one of the BCSDA's basic principles is around no district shall get less money than what they have right now. And one of the concerns around that is that is this going to be and the ministry has, in their development of the recommendations, has said that they're going to keep to that. But there is a underlying concern that is this going to be a 1 year that's going to be, we're all going to be insulated, and then are they going to make some changes from 1 year from now? So it was interesting to see that the enrollment, that not all districts are like Vancouver, and of course it has to do with demographics and the cost of properties and whatnot. So the BCSDA assessment of the funding model and the actual monies that have just come through as yesterday, they were talking about the, I just thought it was interesting to point out that all the processes that were used and the advisory that were used emphasize that there is hard data behind every recommendation that's been put out for us. Every recommendation has information that supports why they're doing what they're doing, and the guiding principles that they have come up with are followed closely and heavily used. And they also emphasize that the panel was very independent. So having gone through that preliminary stuff with some of the information at the council, there was lots of discussion, and I'll maybe talk a little bit about where the discussion went across the province as far as the number of trustees in the room. But also after that, I point out the conversations that we had. I'm inviting us here to contribute to the conversation of what we feel here in Vancouver is important to put into our report. So I'm going to tease out some of the themes that I kind of garnered from the meeting, and then hopefully from here we can not only maybe even tonight, but maybe if you haven't got something tonight, we can certainly take it in writing. And they talked about the fast tracking that the ministry required us to have as far as getting the information back to them. Was like it only came out January 22nd, and everyone is squirming and saying that there's no way we're going to make that deadline of February. So that we're looking at March. So we've got some time to work stuff through for the particular issues that we may have here in Vancouver that you may want to be able to bring up. And so we need to have our stuff in probably before the end of March. So then I would back that date up to at least 2 to 3 weeks to sort of be able to compile all of our information. No decisions have really been made until the ministry really receives the trustee feedback from all the districts. So they're waiting and seeing what they're going to, what people are saying and going to do. So the first part of the conversation was around, a lot of discussion was around the equity of educational opportunities, and the concerns focused on, will the funding formula match the guiding principles? There was a real strong feeling that it should be flexible. Different boards have different needs. As I talked about the enrollment variations, certainly some boards are not going to have the same kind of constraints that we have. An example also that was put out was the per pupil funding for grade 10 to grade 12 levels. All boards like to encourage offering as many courses for all the students in their schools. And they want to engage all students to be in classes and getting the broader range of knowledge base and concern and experiences. But the per pupil funding parameters only get to the funding per course. So while our dollars may go down if we go to a per pupil funding kind of formula or a hybrid of that, that goes against the flexibility that I kind of outlined at the very beginning. As we restrict courses due to the lack of funding, the students in our district at least would be experiencing restrictive courses. We wouldn't be able to offer all, if we don't get enough money, we wouldn't be able to offer the same number of courses. Also, the rural issue was limited with, they talked about with the internet and the transportation issues such as busing from schools and to schools. Recommendation number 3 was talking about the FNASC, which is the First Nations Advisory Steering Committee, and they felt that they should have a stronger voice. They needed to confirm the real consultation took place, and there's a sense that maybe we need to go back and consult with those communities. Recommendation 4, still under equity, was some people felt that we needed to have definitions, stronger definitions. How does the ministry define what the actual norm is when they talk about the norm? Williams Lake, for example, is rural from our perspectives, but the outlying towns nearby Williams Lake would consider themselves to be rural, and Williams Lake to be kind of urban. So what is actually the definition of community is what some people were putting out. Recommendation 6, how does the Ministry of Education define the prevalence model? Some felt that it was arbitrary. Does the supplemental funding actually service mental health issues, and how is it determined what actually qualifies? Are there scans? Are there psychoeducational assessments? Again, need to consult with the Indigenous communities and connect to make sure that they are on track there with that information. Also, the language is vague. Health factors was brought out. What does health factors actually mean? The overall concern is we need to clarify the specificity in language. Too much is really unknown, and where does the data come from for the prevalence model? They needed to know which students are actually included, and the socioeconomic data that can actually even be skewed. And the example was in Delta. North Delta is a lot different community than South Delta, and of course in Vancouver we have the same kinds of differentials with our north, central, and east or south areas. North Delta, one size fit all will negatively affect the equity for student success is what some people were saying. Recommendation 10, still under equity. Will distributed learning be run centrally, and how will that impact our funding in all of our districts? The conversation moved on to accountability, and recommendation 12, 13, 14, which was on page 28, was when you read it, it's really not bad or wrong, but it makes local boards more accountable to the Ministry of Education, and there was a sense that actually trustees lose some local authority, and it creates more of a lead by boards to meet the strategic goals. So there is a kind of underlying concern at the BCSDA level, the overarching level, at least a fear that there is a phasing out of local community voice, as seen in Nova Scotia, Ontario, New Brunswick, and Saskatchewan. And we're obviously, there's that kind of little bit of a fear that are we moving towards the West with the same kind of models that may be happening back East. Recommendation 15, under accountability, there was concern about compliance. The audit and the stronger language is like must comply. Some districts have decided to make decisions for their district that they thought were appropriate, and then didn't really fit into the guidelines, and so the must comply, some districts are now having to pay back to the ministry over time, like an amortized payment period over time. So there's some hard and fast things happening in other outside districts that are of a concern that some people have. Under financial management, recommendation 18, the current model was not linked with inflationary rates, employers' health tax, unanticipated costs that were brought down to, and we've experienced that in Vancouver in the past, can cause problems providing services to students and leading to year-end surpluses. And we talked a little bit about the surpluses and the established reserves. Are they going to equal really stability in transition for year-over-year funding? So there was a concern about that, and but not being able to use the money and create, and so you have the money not being able to infuse the money into the schools for services for kids, and then kids being basically not shortchanged, but not being able to give them extra service or extra support. Recommendation 19, they felt that that was that 3-year range was good. And they did emphasize, a number of people emphasized that we should be pulling out of the funding model, not just the negatives that you may find in the report that concerns us particularly, but find out if there's anything that actually does work, because it gives a more balanced kind of feedback to the ministry. If you're just putting out a negative, all these things are bad and it's not going to work. So there was a sense that, find some of the things that were good, and this was one that they felt the 3-range transition was good. Recommendation 20 around the reserves, there was a definition for clarity. The reset of overages was kept at the district, but it's at the district, but it's overseen by the ministry. And so there's some well-earned suspicions there of who actually is controlling money. We may be holding the monies here as surpluses, but the ministry may dictate how we use it. Recommendation, and again, talking about the lack of or the losing of local authority over spending. Recommendation 21, districts should not be punished for any kind of entrepreneurial activities. And this is again going back to some of the smaller districts that were really squeezed for doing what they thought was right for kids and then being penalized for it through the audit system and the auditors coming in there and then basically making them accountable to having to backtrack on and paying back. Recommendation 18 and 22, they felt that there needed to acknowledge the importance of these recommendations as they weren't part of the original scope. So here's again another positive that we gave some initial feedback from, as a number of different districts did, and they actually reacted to it and brought that in. So they felt that they should, 18 and 22, we should acknowledge that the ministry is actually listening in some respects. There was also just some notes that I pulled off of for the Delta area. Has the government already adopted the recommendations of the independent review panel? And that was one of the bullets. We hear regular reports from implementation advice. Will we hear regular reports from the Implementation Advisory Committee? Again, it is essential that there be a period to model the draft formula, consult with our educational partners, and give feedback. But further, it's essential that the new formula is presented well in advance of implementation to aid districts in their 2021 budgeting process. No surprises is what everyone wants, and the ministry has said that, but then again, what happens a year after that? Districts are facing inequities embedded in the Classroom Enhancement Fund, which arises out of the restored class size composition language. Currently, there are some neighboring districts that have funding disparities as much as $500 per student. How will the bargaining process and the resulting collective agreements be taken into account in this process? Going to recommendation 15, and I'm coming to the conclusion. This will not be a super long report. Consistent with the shift to supporting student improvement and learning, the ministry should defer the recovery of funding for 1 year to allow for school district time to adopt compliance team recommendations. This 1-year deferral would not be available if it was determined that there had been deliberate contravention of funding eligibility policies. So those are fairly, that's my summary report. The next steps will be February 15th. The Deputy Minister is meeting. Timelines and engagements are happening. The board chairs will be meeting on February the 22nd with the joint BCSTA. And so there's going to be all that conversation happening with all the chairs. And so I guess in conclusion, there was a sense with the funding that came out yesterday that the budget is really kind of a rollover budget. We shouldn't be getting too excited about the increase in monies that have come forth that we've heard about, but we need to put it into perspective. There's a 3-year, I think, with $1 billion more, but really all the dollars that were added are already spent. spent through the increased enrollment, spent with the enhancement fund. There's no more really discretionary monies out there that are going to be coming. So it is, and bargaining wasn't included in the budget, of course, because obviously they didn't want to target the money so that they knew exactly what to be bargaining for. So that will be added later. So there's some, there are some things that were not included. The capital funding, 3-year window, for new schools, for seismically upgrading schools, and then that needs to play itself out. And with our comments, I'm hoping that we can hear from you as stakeholders here, and this discussion group, and then from our perspective, put in our report so that at least we have the Vancouver picture represented well. So those are the comments in that I pulled from the Provincial Council and from a number of conversations with people across the district. And maybe if you, I don't know if I can answer any questions, but more importantly, I hope I've pricked your conscience in coming up with some concerns and issues and good points, along with the bad points that we can maybe put into that report to make it a very worthy report that represents Vancouver. That's the end of my report.
Thank you, Trustee Valentine. Does anyone have any preliminary thoughts or questions right now? We'll open up the discussion. Yes, Allison.
The chair, I hope that everybody is aware that the BCTF position regarding recommendation 6 with the prevalence funding is that would be quite disastrous for the support of special needs. We feel that delinking the funding and going to a prevalence model would mean that without having the money targeted, that the services would begin to erode for those students. And so we disagree heartily with that recommendation.
Thank you. Anybody else? Discussion point, question? Yes, Terry.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe I could just add on to what Allison said. We've operated for some time in education throughout my career in an effort to increase our ability to meet the needs of every individual learner. We're very concerned that the prevalence model would ultimately provide incentives or imperatives to less testing, less diagnosis, and therefore would be a little bit more hit and miss for every individual learner in terms of being
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Trustee Fraser.
So I think what you're saying, Trustee Valentine, is that the submission from our district has to be in by the end of March, and that's a little challenging given that half of March is spring break. So is there a timeline for when stakeholder representatives would have to get information to whichever staff member is assigned to this so that it can be incorporated in our feedback?
Yes. Trustee Valentine, do you know timeline?
Well, I think that all districts are experiencing the same constraints of and everyone has the spring break. So that's why I was suggesting early March to get our stuff in. And I think that if we put out we get it collated by the end of March and get it in, then the ministry is going to be, I think they're going to have to listen, because they're going to have to wait, because all districts are going to be doing the same thing. So, and they don't want to be really making any decisions until they've got the feedback from all of us. So I think it's incumbent upon them just to, we get the work done when we can get it done under the conditions that we have. And I threw that target date out, but maybe senior management or someone else has some other better dates that might work for them as far as pulling it together.
Given that spring break starts on the essentially on the 15th of March, we do have a facilities planning committee meeting on the 13th of March. There could be you could schedule another finance committee meeting with that specific topic that night. At least then we have feedback from all stakeholders. And then, that feedback could be somehow summarized. The end of March is, falls on the weekend actually, so we would have to, is there any flexibility, Trustee Valentine, in deadline that from your provincial council?
Well, they had actually said, I mean, there was concerns around, people had expressed that we just got it on January 22nd, and people have need time to digest it, get it out to the stakeholders, get it back, and then put it together. And so it didn't seem realistic. I'm not sure the actual date that they originally suggested, but I think it was something like the end of February. So that's why they were sort of saying, we're all in this together. If we don't all get it in by the end of February, we're going to maybe be looking at March. But they do have to get moving on it too, so we do have to get it in because they're under the gun to get it out and as well.
David, who would be the appropriate person for these comments if stakeholders have thoughts or questions in anticipation of providing for this funding review model if we don't have another meeting?
I would think they should come to myself and Shazad, maybe the superintendent, just to say that we have we're collecting together. And the other thought I had was to, every year the district does submit, a submission to the Select Standing Committee on Finance and Government Services in the fall. And I suspect some of the comments that we provided in the past may tie into some of these recommendations. Also, I have a session tomorrow with other secretary treasurers in the province where we're going to be discussing this. I've already supplied a survey myself as a secretary treasurer. But tomorrow I'll bring back some more detail or some more feedback from BC ASBO, secretary treasurer's perspective on it. So I think if you're looking for feedback to come back, you can just come back to myself and Shazad and maybe Suzanne.
Thank you. Anyone else with a question, comment on the topic? Okay, we'll move on then to item number 4, items for approval. First one, 4.1, the 2018-2019 amended annual budget. Turn this over to Shazad. Oh, David, are you?
I'm going to start it.
Okay.
If that's okay. Where's the remote? Oh, thanks. Okay, so in your agenda book, there's a report on the amended budget. And I'm just going to take you through just want to explain first of all that also attached is the submission form for the amended budget. And the amended budget includes all of the funds that we deal with, the operating fund, the capital fund, all the special purpose funds. So I'm just going to take you through the overall a summary amended budget report that will be going into the ministry, the budget bylaw that the board has to pass. And then I'm going to hand it over to Shazad to talk specifically about some of the things in the operating fund. So we have in the report, it talks about the legislative authority. The board may amend its annual budget if the Minister of Education has changed the funding for the school district. The report talks about Section 106 of the School Act allows the minister to amend the operating grant of a district, and that usually happens in December based on September enrollments. Sorry. And then that's commonly referred to, you know, in the system as the December recalc. So we recalculate the ministry operating grant every December based on September enrollments. Under public sector accounting standards, you know, we have to, districts are all part of the government reporting entity. And under that, based on Treasury Board direction in 2010, you know, we have to follow public sector accounting board framework for financial years ending after December 31st, 2011. And that includes requiring budgets to include elements of all funds. So that would be the operating fund, the special purpose funds, and capital funds. So the PSAB format that is in your document, the ministry documents, you'll see that there's statement 2, which is total revenue and expense. That's all the funds together. And then statement 4 is a change in net financial assets. And then you have a schedule 1, which is change in accumulated surplus by fund. And then schedule 2 talks about the operating revenue and expense. And then the rest of these schedules relate to the different funds. So the operating fund, the special purpose funds are the C schedules, the 3 schedules, Schedule 3 special purpose fund. And Schedule 4 is the capital fund budget. So on the statement 2, you have, that shows the revenue and expense for all of the funds to produce an overall surplus deficit. It shows the revenue by major source, including tuition separately, which is a requirement under PSAB to have tuition revenue shown separately from other revenue. The expenses are shown by function, and it breaks down the, at the bottom of that schedule, it breaks down the overall surplus by fund for the district. And at the very end, it illustrates the budget bylaw amount at the end. So in this particular case, the budget bylaw that you're going to look at tonight is $637,169,378. And here's the statement. This is statement 2 of the 18-19 amended budget. You can see that the total revenues in the amended budget are $627.9 million, up from the annual budget of $615.7, so up $12.1 million. On the expense side, we have $634.3 million of expense in all the funds, and that's up from the annual budget of $620 million, so another $14.3 million increase there. So the net revenue or expense, the net expense in the overall budget is $6.4 million deficit. That compares to the annual budget, which is $4.2 million. So an increase of 2.1 there. And then the budgeted allocation of surplus, again, you can see that it's in the amended budget is 4.5 million versus the annual budget was just over 2 million. So again, an increase of almost $2.5 million of appropriated surplus to balance the budget. At the end, you still see a surplus, a deficit at the end of $1,909,000 versus a annual budgeted amount of 2.2 million. So a slight improvement there in terms of the overall deficit. And that overall deficit relates strictly to the capital fund. As you can see here, the operating fund, you see the breakdown of revenue and expenses between the operating special purpose funds and capital fund. And you can see that the operating budget is balanced to zero, as are the special purpose funds. And the only fund that can carry a deficit in PSAB is the capital fund. And that deficit is basically caused by the difference in timing between the amortization of the capital cost of assets versus the amortization of the capital revenue that relates to the acquisition of those assets. So this is your amended budget bylaw. No, this is the amended budget revenue. So this is broken down a little bit more detailed. So you see the operating fund has revenue of $503.5 million. Special purpose fund is $105.6 million, and capital fund is $18.7 million. So that breaks down the revenue components of the overall budget. And this slide breaks down the expenses by function. So as you can well imagine, most of the instruction expense in the district is either in the operating fund or the special purpose funds. Whereas the amortization of capital assets I just referred to is in the capital fund. But again, this is sort of a breakdown by function only. And then, so what makes up the actual bylaw that you vote on, that the committee is going to recommend to the board to approve, is made up of the operating fund expenses, the special purpose fund expenses, the expenses in the capital fund, any capital purchases from operating or from special purpose funds. And that's what the components of the bylaw are. And so here's the bylaw that you're going to pass tonight or recommend to the board to approve. You can see that in the operating fund is the total expense and the tangible capital assets that are purchased in the operating fund. And in the special purpose fund, it's the same. It's the total expense and also the capital assets purchased. And in the operating fund, it's just the total expense. So those are the components of the amended budget bylaw amount of $637,169,378. So before I pass it over to Shazad to talk more specifically about the amended budget or the operating fund, which is Schedule 2 and Schedule 3 special purpose funds, does anybody have any questions about the overall summary budget bylaw? That's all right.
So David mentioned schedules 2 and 3 are showing the revenue and expenses for the Schedule 2 is the operating funds. Schedule 3 is the special purpose fund, which includes the classroom enhancement fund. So if we look at the special purpose funds first, so basically the PSAB states that any monies coming in from external sources that meet the definition of a liability under the Public Sector Accounting Board is to be reported as a special purpose fund. And these funds are budgeted in Schedule 3, and the NSF is reported as a special purpose fund. So when we compare the amended budget to the annual budget for special purpose funds, you can see our revenues are up $6.1 million. And the breakdown there is that about $5 million, $5.1 million of that is the classroom enhancement fund. And that's broken down between about $3 million for teacher salaries and wages and benefits, and another $2 million that is for remedies that we submitted to the ministry back in November. There's another $800,000 increase, which is from our provincial resource programs, and really most of that was carry forward of surplus funds from previous years that we brought forward into the amended budget to use this year. And again, we can't have a deficit or a surplus in these funds, so you can see on both the amended budget and the annual budget has a net, it's a net zero budget. For Schedule 2 the operating revenue and expenses, our total revenue's gone up just under $6 million from $497.6 million to $503.5 million. And the $6 million increase there has to do with funding from the ministry for as the number of students that we actually had sitting in our schools at September was about 365 students higher than what we had projected would be there when we submitted our June budget. So the addition of 365 students led to an additional $2.7 million from the ministry, which is part of that $5.9 million. There was also an increase in supplemental funding from the ministry because there was 173 more students with special needs that walked through the doors in September versus what we had projected in our annual budget. On the expense side, $7.8 million higher. And again, what we do here is we sit down with all the departments and go through what their actual budget spend has been for the first 6 months of the year, usually to the end of December, and get them to, and help them project out what their spend will be for the remainder of the year. So there's some known items in there that we know how they're going to be spent. And then there's also some additional budget requests that have come in from departments for different programs or staffing levels that we're also including in there. So some of the savings in the expense has to do with vacancy savings. So for example, we budget X dollars to spend on staffing, assuming that the staffing are going to be there in place at the start of September. We don't get those positions filled on day one. They come in throughout the month of September. So we do realize some savings there. Another savings has to do with our average salary cost as well. So we project when we do our budget in June, what our average salary cost is through the hiring process. If we get teachers with less experience, we know that average teacher cost or the average salary cost is going to go down, and that also adjusts what kind of surplus we see during our amended budget process. Stay there. So the largest impacts are those in the savings in the change in our expenses. We had significant savings for the lower average salary cost. That was about $8.3 million. And for vacancy savings, we saw about a $2.5 million savings overall. We did have increases for bringing on some additional teachers and EAs, which was roughly $3 million. There was also some commitments that we brought forward from the previous year, which we'll see in the next slide there, which is about another $2.9 million. One thing that we want to talk about, as David showed you earlier in the when you were looking at the consolidated statements in the budget bylaw, the accumulated surplus, or the surplus that we were appropriating from our annual budget to our amended budget had increased from $2.034 million to $4.5 million. And the reason for that is there was some carryover from last year's year-end financial statements, which we didn't account for in our annual budget process. So the lines, external commitments and internal commitments, those are finalized during our audit, which starts after our June 30th year-end. And those were not reflected in the annual budget. So there's $7.4 million in internal and external commitments that were carried forward from prior years to be spent in this year's budget. The $2.034 million, which is restricted by board resolution, is what was approved in our annual budget by the board for using last year's surplus to balance the budget this year. So when you look at how the accumulated surplus plays out during the amended budget process, you can see we appropriated $2.034 million for the annual budget. The external and internal commitments, which you saw from the previous slide, amount to $7.4 million. During our amended budget development process, we realized that of that 7.4 million that was committed to during year end, there's 2.087 million which either can't be spent or that doesn't need to be spent in the remaining 6 months of this school year. So what we need to do is there's going to be additional spending of $5.3 million. And the current year's net surplus is $2.8 million. So we still need to find this additional 2.477 million to spend to be able to balance the budget to account for those additional commitments. So at the end of the day, we've got the 2.034 million, which was appropriated back in June, and an additional 2.477 million, which we need currently for the amended budget process. And that gives you the 4.5 million appropriated surplus to balance the amended annual budget. Just get some questions.
Yes, thank you. Questions, comments on this item? Yes, Terry.
It's through the chair. Maybe just specifically on that point then. So am I correct then in that the operating reserves are sitting or are projected to rest at approximately 7.9 million then in the operating fund?
Say that again.
So yeah, the accumulated surplus then after the appropriations. The accumulated surpluses, I'm referring then, maybe I'm totally off base on the wrong schedule, but I'm referring to schedule 1. On page 1. And I'm just wondering about the reserves in the operating fund after this extra appropriation of $7,942,976, if that's all restricted.
Yeah, sorry.
Sure.
Through the chair. So, yeah, we started at the 12.4 million, and then during the amended budget process, we're down to 7.9 million. And some of that would be restricted as well.
And then, through the chair, if you don't mind, a follow-up. I know that the capital fund isn't broken out, but just thinking a little bit about the long-range facilities plan discussion, one source of district funding could potentially be the local capital reserve. And I know I didn't have a chance to look at the financial statements, but I've lost track of where it's at. And if there's been any discussion about, I know it's not a lot of money there, but about any transfers to the local capital reserve at this point that then could potentially be brought into the LRFP process as district revenue.
Through the chair to you, Terry. At the end of June, we had industry restricted capital of $583,000. And we had local capital of just 100, no, local capital. Yeah, we didn't have much. We had only 128,000. So there's not much in those reserves to, contribute anything to the long-range facility plan recommendations.
Other questions, comments? Yes, Trustee Fraser.
I'm still a little bit confused about the Schedule 1 figure of the $7.9 million and the current year net surplus on the slide of 2.8 million. And how those two figures reconcile.
Ask the chair where that is.
I think she's talking again about the same thing Terry was talking about, the 7.9 on page 5 of Schedule 1.
Right, okay.
Trustee Fraser, you were comparing, sorry, the 7.9 to which number?
To the number on the screen behind you,
2.8.
which is the current year net surplus of 2.8, negative 2.8. So are you appropriating from the 7.9 to balance this year?
No, we're appropriating from, well, we're appropriating, hang on a second. We're appropriating for 12,455,000. So in the, at the end of June, there was, let's go back a couple of years. At the end of June 2017, there was an operating fund, unrestricted operating fund surplus of 2,457,000. And of that, we appropriated 2,034,000. That's up at the top of your screen there. And then at the end of June of 2018, we had another unrestricted surplus, or there was an unrestricted surplus of 2,972,000. So the balance that we have to appropriate of the 2,477,000 comes from that number. So we are appropriating from 12,455,000. In Schedule 5. Because that unrestricted surplus is part of that number.
Trustee Perry.
So through the chair, still on Schedule 1, that schedule is the amended budget as of June 30th, 2019. So it should have those additional appropriations out of it, right? Or wrong?
She's talking about.
Can I just converse with her?
Yes, of course.
So what are you saying, Barb?
Well, if
When you
this
say
is
Schedule 1, you're talking about Schedule 1
on page 5,
page 5?
the accumulated surplus deficit by fund.
Yeah.
So this is the amended budget. So this is what we're saying. It will be at the end of June 30th, 2019. And this is what we need.
That's the budgeted amount.
Yes, you're right. So yeah, because it could very well be and probably will be changes. This slide, the slide is saying what we need in order to make this budget happen. We need, where does it say? Yeah, an additional 2.4. That 2.4 million should be out of here somewhere, shouldn't it? Out of this, it should be accounted for.
No, what comes out of here is if you look at the net changes for the year, 4,512,091.
Yeah.
That relates to this number here. It's out by $6, I guess. It's 4,512,085. So it's out by $6. So the overall change is so the amount you appropriate to offset that reduces the surplus.
Right.
From 12.4 million down to 7.9.
Right. So with that appropriation, the surplus, although some of it is restricted, is 7.942 million.
Correct. Projected to be at the end of June in the amended budget.
Right. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions, comments? Yes, Hardy.
Yes, thank you, the Chair. Under the Schedule 2, there are a couple of line items, sorry. Yeah, on Schedule 2, page 6. And then I'm matching these notes at the front. Under the operation and maintenance, there's a highlighted amount of consultant fees of $340K. Can you get a little clarification on that?
Slide for that.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
we haven't
Sorry, I might have missed it, or we haven't.
No, we haven't got there yet.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think we're reading too ahead. Okay, I'll wait. Thank you.
Why don't you go on with the slides?
Okay. So again, this is just Schedule 2, which is in your package. So when we look at the function and these are sort of the major categories that account for the change from the annual budget to the amended budget. You can see we've added some net teacher and SCA addition of just over $3 million. There's commitments that we brought forward from last year, which is made up of that internal and external commitments that you saw earlier. 2.9 million of it belongs under instruction costs. There's an increase in sick replacement cost. What we put in here is a potential exempt wage lift. So this is something that before it can happen, the district needs approval from Public Sector Employers Council and the BC Public Sector Employers Association. They've given us some indicative rates, so we've just accounted for it. But whether this happens or not still needs to be determined, but we thought we would account for it in the budget. There's $200,000 that's been put aside for school resources and learning resources. There's a Indigenous legacy carving project that's underway. You can see the totem pole out front. So that there's $100,000 that's been set aside in the amended budget. And $90,000 has been set aside for the communicating student learning program. And I believe that's a pilot. It's underway currently. Along with that, we've talked about the vacancy savings under the SEAs and the lower average salary cost. You see, and there's some other miscellaneous adjustments that makes up the $2.1 million change from the annual budget to the amended budget. Under district administration costs, so the costs required to administratively run the district from the board office. And in there, we have some commitments that carry over from prior year. There was a staff reorganization that was included in there. The shaded areas are some of the budget asks that have come forward during the amended budget process. So capital asset management, 250,000 there. There's some upgrades to PeopleSoft for employee services. It's a pretty significant increase, $625,000, but to assist the employee services team with payroll administration. There's some additional technology costs of $100,000. The potential exempt staff wage lift for this group of employees is $332,000. That's wages and benefits. There's some employee services contracts in play that's been requested for $200,000, and our online kindergarten registration program for $50,000. And some additional miscellaneous adjustments there to add up to the $2.5 million change from the annual budget to the amended budget. And some of the district administration variants. So here's some of the details we went through earlier. Capital asset management consultant fees for $250,000. The PeopleSoft upgrade can be broken down between payroll consolidation project and upgrading think that should say modules, not modals, 250,000. The technology costs for QP staff, and that's to get devices into the hands of our QP staff, of 100,000. The employee services contracts is really consultant costs to help with bargaining. And the exempt wage lifts, which are still to be submitted to BCPC and PSAC and need approval. Under operations and maintenance, there's some carryover projects there, $645,000. There was some overspending on our annual facilities grant projects and the Classroom Enhancement Fund capital projects, $696,000 and $361,000. The natural gas costs, which we talked about earlier during our financial update, $700,000 in there. And consultant fees of $340,000 as well under this category. And those consultant fees are made up of, there's an identity management software that the technology department's asked for. There's a risk management consulting contract in there for $100,000, and that really has to do with the human rights and trying to satisfy some of the decisions that are coming out of that there. There's $100,000 set aside for space planning in the education center, so we're looking to more efficiently utilize the space that we have in here. And a reorganization of our technology department, there's a contract there for $40,000. And on top of that, we also have $200,000 inside of there for furniture purchases for schools that are, it's actually in our capital section, but we wanted to lump it in here to show you that it's actually in this amended budget. That's it, Chair.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, Trustee Parrott.
Oh, just quickly, I was just wondering for the natural gas costs, is that something you were looking for reimbursement from the province?
Yes, Giselle.
Through the Chair, I believe there was a motion that the board put through to BCSTA to do some recovery of the PST, I think it was, that the province collects.
Yes, Trustee Parrott.
Thank you. So all of these charts, the one on page 5 for instruction and the one on page 6, there are 2 on page 6 for district admin and operation and maintenance. You used the term asks. You said these are, I wrote it down somewhere, these are asks. Does that mean some of these haven't been paid for?
Chair. That's correct. The highlighted ones are ones that are, the requests have come in and they've gone into the budget.
Okay. So in other words, the asks to me seem to be asking, obviously, to amend the budget that was set last year to include these. So for example, there's a $200,000 lump thing for furniture. I could see that we might amend the budget if something happened to the furniture and it had to be replaced on an emergency basis, right? And this applies to most of those other things. Otherwise, it should have been in the budget. We should have been able to budget, we should have been able to know that during this year, we're going to have to replace some furniture. That's a budgeted budget amount that we could have foreseen. And same with the other things. It's a budgeted amount that we should have foreseen. It's not something that we should ask for, I think, in the middle of the budget year. You know, we wait till next year and ask for it to be in next year's budget. That's just where my thinking is going.
Does that have any comments to that? But are the asks already approved by VSB? Or are they just literally requests at this point?
Through the chair, so these requests have been sort of vetted through the senior management team and, deemed important enough to be put into the amended budget.
They were identified by senior management as priorities.
That weren't priorities last June.
No.
Yes, Superintendent?
If I could speak, Trustee Parrott, to the furniture specific example. We do have in the current budget here, I think it is $100,000 for furniture. And when the ability came out to add to that, because $100,000 across the entire school district takes a long time to upgrade and renew furniture. We've seen that there are needs in our schools, and based on feedback from our maintenance department, that there would be additional requests. If there was funding to be had, it would be wisely spent to upgrade more schools on their actual furniture.
Yes, I'm certainly not disputing that this is needed. It's just when and where do you budget for it?
Any other questions, comments? Yes, Trustee Fraser.
Because these are budget asks, and, they are put forward, the amended budget comes to the board for approval. When I was reading this report, I was reminded of the action that the board took last year when there were unfilled teacher vacancies that had reduced cost, which are sometimes called savings, in the budget. And at that time, what the board did was take the 1.2 million in reduced costs and make sure that that money went to the students who were affected by not having the teachers in the classroom. And David Green's provided me with the information that has gone, half of that funding went to 4 mentorship positions that are set to expire in June 2019, so will run for a year. And then the other half of the money has gone to fund resources in schools. So 5,000, if I'm correct, David, $5,000 for each elementary school and $10,000 for each secondary school. So when I see in this budget that there are, this year, the difficulty is filling the vacancies, the substitute positions for SEAs. So, what I did is I asked David Green if we could do a similar action this year as a board and say that the students who are experiencing that loss of service this year, that the funds could be put back into those students through, and I understand last year that there was a discussion with our teacher unions about how best to use the funds, and I would suggest that the funds that we're putting back in this year, there would be a discussion with our support staff about how best to spend them. So I asked our staff to prepare to have an amended proposal to the amended budget about how we could incorporate that cost. And I think, David, you have information to share with the committee about that.
Yeah, through the chair?
Yes.
Yeah, so board chair and I had a conversation about this on the weekend, and basically, the $2.4 million that's in there is budgeted savings for vacancies does include benefits, and if you take benefits out, it's a lower number. It's probably 1.8 or 1.9 million. My recommendation to the board chair and now to the committee would be that we would set aside $1.5 million as a special fund to have some conversations with our support staff groups about how that money could be spent to sort of compensate schools for the fact that we did have these vacancies this year that we projected to have budgeted to be that much. So in so doing, that would mean that $1.5 million of other savings or further appropriations or surplus would have to take place in order to balance the budget. So if we go back to, I don't know if you can go back to that slide that shows the surplus, Shazad, please. Right, so I referred earlier to the fact that at the end of June of 2017, we had an unrestricted surplus of 2,457,000, of which we only used 2,034,000. So technically, there's 400,000 some odd money there for that. And then there's also the additional amount that we had to appropriate this year was 2,477,000. And that comes from the surplus that was there at the end of June, the unrestricted surplus of 2,972,000. So if you said that, you know, $900,000 of unrestricted surplus is further appropriation, and then find $600,000 of these budget priority items that have been inputted into the budget, then we would be able to rebalance the budget by doing that. And the suggestions that, you know, I talked to staff today, and some of the things that are in here that could, you know, could wait until to become budget discussions for 2019-2020 would be some of the PeopleSoft upgrades that we talked about, and of course the furniture piece that Barb brought up. So if we changed the PeopleSoft upgrades to 400,000 instead of 625, if we changed it to 225 from 625, so save $400,000 there, and then not budget the furniture for the spring budget, then that's $600,000. And if we did that, we'd be able to rebalance the budget. So that's the proposal I put in front of the committee.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Trustee Fraser.
I'd just like to thank David Green for working over the Family Day weekend on the suggestion that I brought up, having seen the report on the Friday when it became public, and for, you know, staff's work in the day, Tuesday and Wednesday, to bring it forward to this committee. And, you know, I think I would like the committee to consider that this is a way that we can equitably serve our students, in particular our students with special needs who have had a loss of services this year, and try to rebalance that. You know, I know that our employee services staff are doing all they can to fill all our permanent positions and to fill our SEAs on call, and yet we're still not able to get ahead of that. So I think this is a different way in which, as a board, we could show that our commitment to equity.
Yes, Harjeet.
Thank you, through the chair. I just have actually two questions actually. One on page Schedule 2 on page 6 under transportation and housing. As it notes on page 6 in the where the debrief is, the district is budgeting to spend $60,000 less in this category. But when I look at this Schedule 2, it's more than what was budgeted for that annual. Like it's 2.8 and then it's 2.9. I'm just, you know, maybe I'm not reading it right, but I just, you know, I had that question in my mind.
Can we just get clarification on where you're looking there, Harjeet?
Schedule 2, page 6.
Page 6?
Referring to
notes on page 6. Yeah.
That is an error in the Word document. It should say $67,000 more.
Okay, that's what just one more question. Yeah, you know, as through the chair again, Shehzad explained in the tables on page 6 and page 5 the potential exempt staff wage lifts that has been submitted to BCPC and PSAB. Like these numbers, obviously these are the numbers in two different categories. Were they number like a percentage increase numbers, or like how did we come up with those numbers?
To the chair, it was a percentage increase that was provided to us through BCPC that Employee Services calculated and came up with a number. I don't know what the exact percentage is. I think it was a range based on where they fit in on their salary grid.
So through the chair, so that could be different for different groups than that percentage?
Yeah, that would be the case, to the chair. The, for exempt staff, like passive staff, it would be, we tried to move people to the next step in the salary grid that's been approved by, there's an approved salary grid, right? So we tried to move people to that next step, and then for principals and vice principals, we tried to also get them to the next level in their grid. So some people would have got more of a percentage lift than others.
Thank you so much.
Just in the interest of time, I'll listen. Trustee Reddy.
Thanks, through the chair. Just a point of clarification around the external commitments and internal commitments item. You mentioned that they're carried forward but not part of the budget. Could you explain that a little bit more? Could that happen again this year?
Through the chair, it will happen. Yeah, it'll happen again this year because we can't finalize those commitments until we finish our year-end audit. Because we complete the annual budget prior to completion of the year-end audit. So those numbers aren't known at that time.
Thank you.
Just a follow-up to that. So when do we find out about the audit results?
Through the chair, so your first meeting in September is when the board would approve that.
So just turning then quickly to wrap this particular topic up, there's a recommendation. Just given the Trustee Fraser's proposal, and I think that makes sense to put aside a $1.5 million surplus fund. So I guess that's going to be a further amendment to the amended annual budget. But there's a recommendation then, I guess, if the committee thinks that's a surplus fund that we should put aside with that amendment, and there's a recommendation then to put that amended annual budget of $637,169,378 to the board for 3 readings on February 25th, 2019. With that?
Sorry, I'm making a comment, not signaling. You used the word surplus fund, and I think it should be special fund.
Sure, special fund, yes. You're right, I misspoke. Trustee Valentine, you're okay with recommending this matter go to the board? Okay. With that then, so perhaps we'll move on to the next agenda item. That's item 4.2. It's the 2019 and 2020 budget timeline. Shazad, do you want to speak to this one?
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. So at the November and January meetings, you saw a high-level presentation as far as the budget timeline goes. What we're being presented tonight is the actual detailed timeline of the budget process for 2019-2020. The timeline has first and second reading of the budget bylaw at the April 29th, 2019 Board of Education meeting. The third reading and adoption at the June 24th meeting. One of the, I guess, benefits of not having adoption of the budget till June 24th, especially this year, is that we know that there's going to be bargaining that's going to be occurring. And even though there's no certainty that bargaining will be completed and finalized prior to the end of the school year, If there is some movement, there is some decisions there, we can incorporate that into the budget for June. You can see in the timeline in the attachment, we've held our stakeholder workshops earlier this year. We've met with mostly all the groups. We've got a few more left to go. And then we are also, we'll be presenting a sort of first draft of the budget on April the 9th before it goes for first and second reading on the 24th. And on April 23rd, there's a committee of the whole where there'll be opportunity for delegations to come and give input into the budget process. Again, just prior to it being going for first and second reading on April 29th. That's the report.
Thanks, Shazad. I think it's going to be good that final budget won't be approved to the 24th of June. So is there any questions or comments on this timeline? Yes, Trustee Perry.
Let me just, so that on the timeline, there are 2 times for the public to provide input. The April the 9th and April the 23rd, if I got that right.
Through the chair, there's also there's the public survey.
The survey, yeah.
Which will be open for 3 weeks there. Plus there'll be all the other finance committee and possibly board meetings where delegations can come and make presentations.
Thank you.
Yes, and I might add that we've already been approached by a number of people who are looking to speak at that April 23rd committee of the whole, so I'd expect there'll be a number of delegations of that night. Any other comments, questions? Yes, Trustee Reid.
Through the chair, just a question around the location of some of those public, so there's a public survey and then the 2 committees of the whole. Just a suggestion that one wouldn't be at the board, but maybe in the community or at a school.
Are you thinking it's going to be the whole itself, or what do you?
Yes, one of the public consults, so like, I don't know, April 9th or May 15th or April 23rd.
That happened before?
Well, it hasn't happened since I've been in the district, but that's only a year and a half, so. Has that ever happened before?
Yeah.
So we take that under advisement and.
Thank you. Good comment. Yes, RG.
Yeah, just a quick a question on the, through the chair again, sorry, on the timeline. So on April the 9th, the preliminary or the first budget get presented. And then April 23rd is the committee of the whole. And is there any time prior to the board reading on April 29th, if there are going to be any revised budget after the consultation process? I don't see that part there, so I'm just wondering.
I think RG's just asking, it's not really, are we doing revisions after?
If there is any
prior to the 23rd or the 29th? Sure.
Through the chair, I think that would happen prior to final third reading and adoption. So we would bring a draft budget. We would also have a lot of input, but it's going to take us time to make those, any sort of amendments to the budget. But prior to it coming to the June meeting, we would see some amendments happening there.
Thank you.
Yes, Trustee Ready.
Thank you, through the chair. Just further to that question, at what point would also the consultation report backs be available? Would that be more before the first and second reading or the third reading?
You're talking about the public survey?
That and also the stakeholder workshops that are just above, not in yellow, like the February, mostly February dates.
So through the chair, the stakeholder workshops, we're just finishing that up. So I would anticipate the report coming back to finance at the April meeting for the stakeholder workshop. The public survey, we're going to report out on the for the May meeting. And then the public consultation that happens on April 23rd, all the trustees will be there to hear it firsthand.
Thank you. Yes, trustee Perry.
So on April the 23rd, it says public consultation on 2019-2020 preliminary budget. Is that the first time we see the preliminary budget?
Through the chair. So April 9th, there'll be a presentation on the sort of first draft of the preliminary.
Oh, so that's where it is. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? No, okay. Well, with that, there's a recommendation attached to this that the budget attached to the report for the development of the 2019-2020 annual budget be approved, subject to changes in the scheduling, stakeholder sessions, and committee meetings, and form part of the budget development process. Committee members? Consensus on that? Okay. Thank you very much. Right, our second to last agenda item of the night. Item for approval 4.3. This is the needs budget terms of reference. David, are you going to take the lead?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So in your package, there's a report, a staff report that sort of summarizes the process that we've gone through, identifies the fact that there was a board motion at the conclusion of the 2018-2019 budget process to develop a needs budget that would be guided by terms of reference to be approved by the board, informed by 2016-2021 strategic plan, consider past budgets, and be created with input from stakeholders. So we presented that to the Finance Committee on November 21st. And then we formed a working group, and the working group consists of members of all our stakeholders, and I think there's an error here in the report. We met on December 13th and January 9th. We didn't actually meet on February 12th, I don't think, because we had a snow day. But the trustee representatives on that working group are the chair, Trustee Henson, and Trustee Gonzalez. And also myself and Shazad, secretary. So we worked on various things, you know, in those working group sessions. And I guess the draft that's attached to your report is sort of lays out what we think a terms of reference that the board can consider moving ahead in this. So again, the methodology that we talked about, and I want to thank the working group then broke up into a smaller group, which consists of myself and Shazad and Harjeet and Allison. And, you know, we met, I think, once or twice, and then we shared some thoughts back and forth via email. So I think the methodology that we want to look at, first of all, is that the needs budget will be focused on the district's operating budget only. And we identified a couple of themes that we thought might be main themes for the development of that needs budget, they being equity and advocacy. The working group needs to define what equity and advocacy means, and there will be reliance on this committee to create discussion points on how to identify the needs and parameters that go with those. So initial consideration of the themes by the working group suggests that equity will be focused on what individual students need to be successful in the system, and that advocacy will be focused on creating a system that provides success for all students. Consultation with stakeholder groups will be required to have stakeholder representatives review the themes of equity and advocacy with the members and what it means to them. And in the working group, we actually talked about with the different stakeholder groups, like, how do you contribute to student success? Like, what does your group do? So, for example, we talked to the tradespeople and we said, you know, you're the people that go out there and fix the schools up so kids can come and, you know, be in a safe environment, or that the lights are working, the plumbing is working, that sort of thing. So we tried to focus the stakeholders on, their individual contributions to student success. And then we talked about, we need to have some perspective on what the changes in the past in the district when it comes to budgets. We talked about student vulnerability, the changes that have taken place over the last number of years, number of increased students with special needs, the proliferation of technology, the fact that we have deferred maintenance that's increasing every year, we have food programs, that sort of thing. So we thought that given all the significant changes, stakeholders need to identify the elements that students need to be successful versus what individual stakeholder groups might want to see in a budget. So it's really a conversation around student success versus individual stakeholder wants in terms of adding things to a budget because you're a stakeholder. We're trying to create a situation or a circumstance where all the stakeholders can work together to develop something that would be considered to be a needs budget based on success. We identify the fact that we might need a hierarchy of needs, and we identified some documents and reports that could be analyzed by the committee. So we have previous restoration budget work. We have previous budgets, say for the last 5 years. These are some of the things we're talking about. There's a report, a study on community-based team on vulnerability. Allison provided some information from the BCTF on research on funding and teachers' perspective on education funding. There's some previous work that was done on core versus non-core services. We have some information comparing our staffing levels to other district staffing levels. We could look at, as Fraser talked about tonight, some of the impact of proposed recommendations in the new funding formula. And we also have some reviews underway right now, alternate education, special education. And of course, we're always going to have proposals that are going to be made for the 2019-2020 budget. So the end goal of reviewing those documents would be to create some sort of gap analysis of needs with input from all stakeholders. And that's the sort of methodology that we want to adopt. The resources for this terms of reference would be, the working group continue to provide input to the needs budget. Once the board approves these terms of reference, and we'll work through the finance committee in order to do that. So we just envision that this would be part of the budget process going forward. It's a parallel exercise as we develop the 1920 budget also. So keep that in mind. Thank you.
I'm sensitive to the fact that we never had our February 12th meeting, and so these terms of reference didn't go back to the working group prior to coming to this committee. So it may be that the committee's thoughts are that it needs to go back to the working group prior to going to the board. So I put that out there. I know that Allison Harjeet and you're on the working group. Not everyone who's on that working group is here tonight. So my thought would be that we go back to the working group, but obviously I'm open for suggestions. We'd have to set a meeting relatively quickly in order to make sure it does inform our 2019-2020 budget process. So sort of open it up if anyone's got any questions or comments or thoughts on this.
Yeah, actually, thanks through the chair. We were, just me and Allison I just had a little chat with her earlier as well. Because we were supposed to meet on the 12th, and that's why I believe it says these references are agreed by the working group. We haven't met as a whole working group yet. So yeah, I will be, happy that if we take it to the working group. But yeah, that would be because we were a smaller group, part of the bigger group, but this hasn't gone back to the working group.
Yes, I agree. And given that the budget now is looking at a June approval, I think we've got a bit of time. I don't know, Trustee Gonzalez, do you have any thoughts on this, being the chair of the budget working group?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be good to kind of wrap it all up, put a bow on it, send it back, finalized by everybody. So I'm fine with that if we can make it work. I'm with.
Sorry.
Yes, David.
I just thought that there is a board meeting on March the 4th, which still puts us in line with the development of the budget. So we have a meeting to work with next week to finalize this and clean it up, and like Trustee Gonzalez has put a bow on it. And we could then recommend it to the board March 4th, if that works.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yes, Trustee Chandler.
Can we make a recommendation to the board with the, I don't know.
Subject to the final,
Subject to
the
thinking,
final
yeah.
of their working group.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's the idea. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Trustee.
Thanks through the chair. Thank you for sharing the terms of reference. I was just curious too about some of the contextual references of like documents that could be analyzed. Was there discussion in the working group around like using like the city's like poverty reduction strategy or comprehensive community plans or other local city documents?
I can just speak to that. We haven't, because it hasn't gone back, the working group hasn't had any input on what those documents might be, but I appreciate that. And we'll make note of that to bring back to the group. Or I will anyways as a member. Anybody else with comments, questions? Yes, Allison.
I just want to say that I really appreciated this exercise. I think we've had some really rich discussions, and it's been a really worthwhile activity to engage in.
Thank you. I appreciate the comment. Anybody else before we? Yes, Trustee Fraser.
I really appreciate, as part of the previous board, I really appreciate having the comment because, this came forward under their mandate. And, what I like to see is that all the stakeholders are coming together and looking at the needs of our students. So thank you for sharing that.
Okay.
Perhaps the recommendation could be worded slightly differently.
Yes.
The committee by consensus tonight would the finance committee by consensus recommend the Board of Education approve and meet budget terms of reference after the final review of the working.
Yes. Okay, yeah, so we'll leave then as superintendent or as Secretary Green was saying, the recommendation then of this committee will be worded that the finance committee by consensus recommend the Board of Education approve the needs budget terms of reference as reviewed and revised at the working group to
at the
March 4th meeting of the board as reviewed and revised by the working group next week. Does that make sense to the committee? Not as clear as it could be, you know the point. Thank you.
Wording right.
Yes. Okay. With that, then there's just one. Is there any item 5 information item requests from anyone? Yes, Archie.
Yeah, through the chair, I did request an information item on January 16 meeting regarding an update on the community link funding in terms of meals program. And I didn't see that on the agenda, so maybe we can get that next time because I did request on the January 16 meeting.
Thank you. Any other information requests? Okay. Sorry for keeping everyone a half hour over schedule here, but the date and time of the next meeting is Wednesday, April 8th, 2019 at 5:30 p.m. Thank you for coming.